Welcome to Trash Talk MMA, the number one podcast for news and insight that matters in the world of mixed martial arts. Brought to you live and unfiltered from all four corners of the globe by MMA aficionado, Antoine Peltier.
Yo, and welcome to the Trash Talk MMA podcast. I'm your host, Antoine Peltier. We are still live from Chalong, Phuket, Thailand, and here's another edition of the show where we're going to cover a little bit of a recap of Bellator 133. You might be noticing a little bit of difference in the sound. I got a new MacBook Pro and some new software, so I'm experimenting a little bit on these next podcasts. So just bear with me. We'll find the right formula, I'm pretty sure, within a week or so. But yeah, if there's any difference in the sound, if you prefer the old one, let me know. If you prefer the new one, let me know. Otherwise, still the same good content. So Bellator 133 featured a main event in the middleweight division between Alexander Shlemenko, the former champion, and slugger extraordinaire Melvin Manhoef. In that main event, things did not go Manhoef's way. In the second round, he was very violently spinning forearm and punch KO'd by Shlemenko in devastating fashion. If you didn't get to see it, go to trashtalkmma.com. I posted a little GIF file of it. Pretty violent, pretty shocking. When it landed, it was pretty humorous even to see the expression on Manhoef's face. Yeah, he definitely didn't know what hit him and went down like a sack of shit. But yeah, so it's the second time in a row that Manhoef gets starched in Bellator after Joe Schilling. Manhoef actually looks kind of old. It was weird. His hair looked old. His face looked old. His skin looked old. He definitely didn't have the pop that he normally has in his fights. He never really found his gear. It seemed like he was there, kind of sluggish. He never turned on the intensity. He was obviously, I think, pretty respectful of Shlemenko's striking prowess. And and he was right to fear it because he certainly got caught with it. Manhoef never really hurt Shlemenko. I don't feel Manhoef was ever really in the fight, frankly. So it's a shame. Everybody knows I'm a big Manhoef fan. I wanted to see him get the win, but listen, Shlemenko's a great former champ, and he's a great fighter in his own right, and it was good to see him get the win to get him back on the winning track to see if he can redeem his loss against Halsey and perhaps get a title fight shortly in the middleweight division. I'm not sure what Bellator's plans are for Halsey. I'll have to look at their calendar, but I didn't see anywhere that he was scheduled for a fight yet. So maybe they'll just immediately give him a rematch against Shlemenko, or they'll slot him against somebody new. In the co-main event, Pat Curran faced off against Daniel Weichel. Weichel, of course, had won the last featherweight tournament in Bellator. And frankly, Curran came out flat again and lost a split decision to Weichel. I think for the most part, it should have even been a unanimous decision for Weichel. It seems like in his past few losses that Curran doesn't really want to be in there. And it's bizarre because he's again one of those fighters who, when he gets in there and his mojo's right, he's really an exciting fighter. And but it seems like when he starts to lose, that he gets in a bit of a psychological funk. So not sure what's going on with Curran. I was disappointed with his performance as well as Manhoef's. But good for Weichel. He definitely, that was the biggest fight of his career, and he definitely made it worth his while. And I guess he'll probably get a fight between the winner of Patricio Freire Pitbull and Georgi Karakhanyan, who won his last fight and was awarded a title shot with Pitbull. So we'll see how he fares against the top level of the division. But, he looked good. Curran puts a fear in a lot of fighters, and Weichel was very, very confident there and looked like he wanted to be there, and he took the fight to Curran and he won it. So great win for Weichel. Major setback for Curran. I hope he can somehow find his mojo, find that killer instinct that made him such an exciting fighter only a few fights ago, and come back to his true form. In the other two main card fights on Bellator 133, Canadian Julie Budd pretty much steamrolled over Gabrielle Holloway in a very unanimous, dominant 3-round decision. And Chris Honeycutt, who was being promoted heavily by UFC welterweight Josh Koscheck as the next big thing at welterweight, made pretty short work of Clayton McFarlane as well, TKOing him in the 3rd round in very dominant fashion. After Bellator 133 aired in the media, they released the salaries from the card, and it's pretty disturbing to see how little these guys are officially getting paid. For example, Melvin Manhoef only got $15,000 as a salary. Alexander Shlemenko only got $20K. And for the most part, a lot of the fighters on the card only got $1,000, $2,000, or $3,000 in declared salary. So, of course, we don't know what they're getting in terms of full pay and sponsorship money, etc. But, for the public, it's pretty disturbing to see guys going into the cage, fighting for the UFC or fighting for Viacom, and seeing that they're getting paid these pathetic salaries. I personally hope something can be changed for these guys. I have the utmost respect for what they bring to the cage, for what they have to do outside of the cage to be ready to compete. They're the greatest athletes in the world, and they put their bodies and minds and souls through a tremendous amount of trauma. And the least they could get for it is a solid paycheck. So interesting to see where all this is going to go. Where especially with the UFC. Reebok sponsorship deal, how that's going to affect fighters. Obviously, Bellator isn't subject to the same deal, and these fighters can still get sponsorship outside. But ultimately, it should be the promotion that's paying them the bulk of their money. That's who they're fighting for, and that's who they're making the bulk of the money for. So it'd be nice to see an adjustment of these salaries in the very near future. Looking forward to February 27th, we'll be having a pretty spectacular Bellator 134 that's being billed as a UK versus United States type card, reminiscent of a couple of UFC cards that have done that, UFC America versus Brazil or America versus Canada. Always makes for an entertaining card when there's a lot of people from the same countries facing people from another country. In the light heavyweight division, we'll be seeing the very dominant and impressive Emmanuel Newton, who will be defending his belt against the Brit Liam McGeary. That should be a tremendous fight. McGeary's looked great in his Bellator fights, destroying everybody in his path, and Emmanuel Newton has just been invincible since arriving in Bellator. So I'm looking forward to seeing him fight. At welterweight, there is going to be the always fun Paul Daly, always bringing the knockout, always going for the kill, always puts on great fights. He's fighting Andre Santos. I'm not familiar with Santos, but so it should result, in Daly getting another electrifying knockout. At light heavyweight, there's going to be Ramo Sokoju. Most people know him just as Sokoju. He's famous back in the day for knocking out Lil Nog in Pride, and also back-to-back knocking out Ricardo Arona. Then he made a transition to the UFC where he wasn't too successful. He'll be fighting Linton Vassell. I'm not familiar with Vassell either, but that should be a decent fight. At heavyweight, there's an interesting contest between natural heavyweight Czech Congo and King Mo Lawal, who normally fights at 205. So he stepped up to face Czech Congo. He's moving up in weight for that fight. Should be pretty dangerous for him. I think Czech Congo should get the better of this scrap. But Lawal hits hard, and when he brings it, he brings it. And he could definitely use his wrestling to put Congo on his back. And we know that when Congo's on his back, he doesn't have a lot of tools. So it should be interesting to see what goes down there. And finally, at welterweight, there's Michael Page. If you're not familiar with Michael Page, try to find some of his fights. He's been putting on some spectacular knockouts at welterweight in Bellator. And he will be facing Curtis Millender. And also on the prelims, former UFC middleweight Tandem McCrory. Actually, wait, I believe he used to fight at welterweight in the UFC. Yes, and he's now competing, I believe, at middleweight in Bellator, and he scored a spectacular 20-second knockout in his Bellator debut. Not sure why he's on the prelims. I guess it's because they're trying to keep all these Brits versus US guys on the main card, but I'm looking forward to seeing Tandem McCrory again. He was always fun to watch in the UFC, and he looked very impressive in his Bellator debut. So there you have it. There's my Bellator 133 recap and a little Bellator 134 preview, but we'll get more in depth as we get closer to that date. This is the Trash Talk MMA podcast. I'm your host, Antoine Pelletier. It's been a pleasure. Hit me up on Twitter at Trash Talk MMA. Go check out the site, trashtalkmma.com. There's all sorts of news and blogs and videos and GIFs. I try to just curate all the news that I find online and bring you guys the most interesting tidbits of it all. And we will be back really, really soon for my recap of UFC Fight Night 60. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Trash Talk MMA podcast. Be sure to visit trashtalkmma.com. And don't forget to follow Antoine on Twitter at TrashTalkMMA. Let us know you're listening. Use hashtag TrashTalkMMA.
These next podcasts, so just bear with me. We'll find the right formula, I'm pretty sure, within a week or so. But yeah, if there's any difference in the sound, if you prefer the old one, let me know. If you prefer the new one, let me know. Otherwise, still the same good content. So Bellator 1, and here's another edition of the show where we're going to cover a little bit of a recap of Bellator 133. You might be noticing a little bit of difference in the sound. I got a new MacBook Pro and some new software, so I'm experimenting a little bit on these.
Welcome to Trash Talk MMA, the #1 podcast for news and insight that matters in the world of mixed martial arts. Brought to you live and unfiltered from all four corners of the globe.
33 featured a main event in the middleweight division between Alexander Shlemenko, the former champion, and slugger extraordinaire Melvin Manhoef. In that main event, things did not go Manhoef's way.
MMA aficionado, Antoine Pelletier.
Yo, and welcome to the Trash Talk MMA podcast. I'm your host, Antoine Pelletier. We are still live from Chalong, Phuket, Thailand.